Hi everyone, it's Dean here from Urban Grow and Grant Horticulture, and I'm joined today by Callum, our senior designer at Grant Horticulture. The topic of today's conversation is gardening styles, and we're going to touch on cottage gardens, minimalistic gardens, and modern gardens. So Callum, cottage gardening, should we start with cottage gardening?
Yeah, the traditional British cottage garden.
Yeah, I think cottage gardening is just a good excuse to throw all your favourite plants into the ground and almost like hope for the best. And
It does feel that way, doesn't it? Yeah, I'm sure there's more skill to it, but it does feel that way. But yeah, it's as it sounds.
Yes.
It's chocolate box, it's kind of rural kind of style planting. There's natural materials in there as border edging. There's a great range of traditional English perennial border plants that sit within there.
There are, and
digitalis, hollyhocks, your sort of larger scale plants.
yeah, and I wonder if some of those have not fallen out of favour, but just fallen out of people's consciousness, because you touch on some beautiful plants there, and I'm thinking back to sort of cottage gardens, and there isn't, we say there's not an art to it, but there is, because you've got your seasonal highlights, so it starts with your spring bulbs, and cottage gardeners have an understanding of how they get value out of each square metre.
Yes.
And using beautiful sort of what we call cottage garden plants, which most of them are perennials, which are now really prevalent in modern gardening. But they can all be found in cottage gardens.
That is true.
So.
That is true. And there's also the sort of edible element to a cottage garden, which is often forgotten about. The idea of production, self-sustainability, which are great values for today's world as well, which are really important. And the idea of kind of your garden being your kingdom, if you like, that's where you live, that's where you exist. You produce from the garden, you take from it, you give back to it, which actually seems quite modern. Actually.
It does, yeah. We're just looking back, aren't we? And they're usually chock full of wildlife. There'll be hedgehogs running around, frogs, toads.
Ultra biodiverse. Fabulous spaces and a riot of colour usually.
Yeah, and if you're not a fan of that sort of riotous colour, your hots and your calm colours all mixed up, you could pare your planting palette back and still have a cottage garden.
Yeah, absolutely. And climbers are a great example as well. Annual climbers such as sweet peas, which are really often overlooked.
Beautiful.
And are just such a staple of that style.
And so easy to grow.
Yeah, and so due a revival.
Yeah.
I think quite frankly, they really should be in everybody's garden, because you can grow them on a windowsill or you can grow them in an estate. They can grow anywhere and they're beautiful.
They are one of my favourite plants, and I remember being at horticultural college, and one of the best tips I ever had was grow a plant up a single cane, and then cut all the tendrils off and tie the plant in, and then you end up with flower spikes that are like 12 to 18 inches long, arrow straight, because the tendrils haven't got to them, and all the energy's gone into the flowers.
Yeah, beautiful.
So you can properly, blow everyone away with these beautiful stems.
Yeah.
So cottage gardening is beautiful, and
it is.
It can be as hard or as easy as you want to create, I suppose.
Yeah.
And perennial plants are really easy to just split and divide, so you can beg, borrow, and steal.
Yeah, sustainable again in that sense, where you can keep dividing, keep moving the plants around the garden. A lot of them self-seed as well, so you're able to actually, the plants proliferate on their own, which is great.
And they give movement to a garden, don't they? When you don't know where your foxgloves or your verbena are going to appear. Yeah. And I suppose if you want extra height in your border, you could use planters within the border.
Sure.
You could, bring those plants, if they're frost hardy, you can bring, or frost tender, you can bring them in over the winter months. Yeah. So you can really mix it up, couldn't you?
Yeah. The opposite of that would be minimalist.
Minimalist garden. Yeah, minimalist. That's an interesting topic, isn't it?
It is.
I think that's a real skill, and I wonder whether many folk in England can cope with that sort of really pared back palette, because we have as a nation, we're obsessed with plants and collecting plants.
Yeah, I agree. I tend to find that the minimalist gardens that I tend to enjoy anyway tend to be the ones with clean lines, clear sight lines, big architectural details, whether that be through walling detail or whether it be through gates or different kind of carpentry, whether it be through big sculptural planting like big ferns or big, palms, or just really big sculptural trees. Evergreen elements tend to be really popular in minimalist gardens because a lot of the sort of fluffier perennial plants kind of get pushed to one side in favour of evergreen elements that last, many seasons. And the materials kind of speak for themselves. I think that's a real benefit of minimalist gardening, if you like, and the style is that the plants themselves and also the hard materials that are used for the walling, for the pathways, the seating perhaps, whatever it might be, just tend to be cleaner. You have cleaner materials, less tumbled edges, less, less faff, really, it seems.
I think one of my favourites when it comes to minimalist gardening is Anushka Hempel.
Oh, great.
Oh, she's, I think one garden that always springs to mind is it's a private garden on sort of a stately home. So you're expecting that sort of really busy herbaceous borders. And there's this little sheltered corner, and all there are maybe a dozen hostas in pots, just one plant, identical plants, all in pots, and it just looks so sharp.
But it's such a great device.
Yeah, and it's really calming. It looks like a really nice space to be in.
Yeah, that's a great point. There is that kind of mental element to a modernist garden as well, where the confusion's really pared back. Mm-hmm. So you can be at one with your thoughts, you can sit down and contemplate, think of what you need to think of, and not be too distracted by the busyness of a riot of colour like you might see in a cottage garden.
Yeah. I think another designer that springs to mind is Mine Royce. Forgive me if I've got the name pronunciation wrong. Belgian garden designer from about 100 years ago, and her gardens look minimalistic and modern even today. And it's that really pared down palette and really clean lines, simple materials, and she's used common everyday shrubs like berberis.
Yes.
Hideous plant, most of us think, but she's clipped it into these cube forms. Beautiful. So she's used red berberis as sharp clipped forms and Miscanthus sinensis, the grass.
Fantastic.
And yew hedges.
Lovely.
And flat still water.
Oh, what a great palette.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. It's funny you should mention about the minimalist and the modern, because I often feel that those two terms get kind of interchanged and sometimes misunderstood. So to me, like I just explained with the minimalist, it's about clean lines, it's about defined shapes and about evergreen elements. And the modernist element, to me anyway, is about modern ideas about sustainability, about saving rainwater, about the modern garden that we experience today and for the needs of today's gardeners are about naturalistic planting. They're about things that can be self-sustaining, can be nourishing in a way for you as a person in a really quite confusing
So you've
world.
almost gone back to cottage gardening there,
exactly.
haven't you? Picked
It's
up on
almost
point.
gone the full circle.
And it's I think we're slowly but surely moving away from that sort of throwaway world we've had for the last 40, 50 years. Yeah. Like nowadays, Urban Grow stock water pots, but they're not those plastic hideous things that why would you want that in your garden? Why not have a thing of beauty that's going to last a lifetime to collect your rainwater?
Absolutely.
And why not use like nice terracotta pots or nice metal pots that are going to last in a modern, modern garden? Yeah. And it's that modern. It's almost become a movement, hasn't it? Our modern gardens, swathes of planting that can be divided. If something dies or you want to extend your garden, you can just divide the plants you have.
Exactly. That idea of the bold swathe, if you like, the sort of Pete Udolph kind of look, where you're introducing lots of grasses, lots of similar colours. Mm-hmm. The palette's very kind of restrained, but it's planted en masse, so you've got this really interesting palette in front of you and really interesting textures, which I think is a real, it seems to be, kind of a little motif, if you like, of the modern garden. Mm-hmm. It's the idea of texture and movement. That's what a modern garden means to me anyway.
And texture is a really interesting point, isn't it? We talk about flowers and colour in the garden, and texture and foliage are vital. And they're, I think, unsung heroes of a garden. If you need foliage colour, your foliage colour is going to be there all spring, summer, autumn, and also it's going to change depending on the plant. Will change through the seasons. Whereas something that has flowers will flower and finish.
Definitely.
So there are so many elements to the garden to consider.
There is.
So these things don't happen by happy accident, do they? There's a lot of thought goes into a great garden.
Surprising amount.
Yes.
There is. All beautiful styles. They're all great, and they all have their place.